Now we have another verse in Surat Yunus, verse 5. That's the 10th surah, verse 5. It says, "He it is who made the sun a light emitter and the moon a light reflector, and ordained mansions for it, so that you may know the numbering of years and the reckoning. He did not create that but with truth. He makes the signs distinct for a people who know." Here we see the two celestial bodies not just alluded to but named, the sun and the moon, and again they are used for the numbering of years. Of course, given the fact that the Muslims have had a strictly lunar calendar from very early on, and I'm showing in these videos that it was from the time of Omar's calendar reform, so that's very early, 6 years after the death of the Prophet ﷺ. By the time the tafsir were being written, that strictly lunar calendar was already well established. So if you're writing a tafsir and you come across this verse, which says he made the sun and the moon for the numbering of years, that's got to be a little confusing because the Muslims are not using a calendar that uses the sun and the moon for the numbering of years. So some of the mufassirun will say that as you read the verse, the sun is mentioned as a light emitter, and then the moon is mentioned as a light reflector, and then something else is said about the moon, that Allah ordained mansions for it, so that by the time we get to the phrase about the numbering of years, it's no longer even talking about the sun. It's talking about the moon only. So the numbering of years was to be done by the moon. You find that claim in a section of the Tafsir of Tabari for verse 10, for Surah 10, verse 5. Now mind you, in other verses, where the sun and moon are also described as being made serviceable for human beings, like Surah 16, verse 12, Surah 35, verse 13, and Surah 39, verse 5, Tabari does say that the sun and the moon are to be used for the numbering of years. He just doesn't say it in the tafsir for Surah 10, verse 5, where you would obviously look for it. He says it as an explanation of other verses that don't mention the numbering of years, where you wouldn't be looking out to see how he handled that phrase and its challenge to the strictly lunar year. Nonetheless, so the allegation is that the mansions of the moon in the verse distracts from the notion of the sun, and that we're no longer even supposed to be thinking about the sun when it says the numbering of years. But it says that Allah ordained mansions for the moon. What are mansions? The notion that the moon has mansions is well established and was well established before the time of the Prophet. Lunar mansions are segments of the sky that are marked off by star clusters. In the course of the month, as the moon goes round the earth, it takes the moon 27.321661 days to go once through the fixed stars. Every night the moon will show a slightly bigger and then smaller shape, but it will also appear in a different place in the fixed stars every night. In the course of a month, it will appear in 27 of these segments of the sky, and then it will disappear when it enters the 28th. So I have a globe that will show you what the mansions look like. This is a celestial globe. It has the Earth on the inside. The clear plastic outer shell has white dots all over it that are the fixed stars. Stars that are so far away they're not like planets. They don't move around. They stay in the same position with respect to one another forever, basically. This is where our constellations are. Looking up from the Earth, you would see the stars staying in the same place, so they're called fixed stars. They don't move. They certainly move over the course of each night. They seem to revolve around as the Earth turns, but they don't move with respect to each other. They stay in the configurations. We know from the poetry of the pagan Arabs that they had divided the sky into 28 segments, segments where the moon appeared in one of them each night. These are the mansions. So if the moon had appeared low in the western sky as a new crescent moon in a certain segment of the fixed stars, let's say find the Pleiades. So say the moon had appeared in this segment as a new crescent. Then the next night it would appear as a slightly larger crescent in this segment. And then on the third day, it would appear as an even bigger crescent in the next segment after that. And the fourth day, the fifth day, it will go through all of these segments, 28 of them, and then come back around and reappear as a new crescent moon. But it will reappear 2 segments higher, or 2 segments further on from where it had appeared as a new crescent in the previous month. So that's what the segments are. We read in Surah Yunus, verse 5, that Allah ordained for the moon mansions. And those are the mansions, so that we would know the numbering of years. So what would constitute a year using the mansions? The moon goes through all the mansions every month, but meanwhile every month starts when the moon appears in its new crescent shape. So presumably you would want to count the start of the year when the new crescent moon returned to the same mansion. And you see confirmation of that in Surat Yasin, verse 39, where it says, Allah ordained mansions for the moon until it returns like an old dry palm branch, that is, like a crescent. In other words, the moon returns in the crescent shape to the same mansion. That's the start of the year, when the crescent moon is in one of the mansions. But if the crescent moon is in a particular mansion at the start of the year, that means that the sun is also in a particular mansion at the start of the year, because it's the relative position of the sun and moon in the sky that gives the moon its crescent shape. If you're keeping the sun in a particular mansion at the start of each year, then what you have is a solar year, with intercalation of 7 lunar months in 19 years to keep the crescent moon in its proper mansion, signifying the new year. So regardless, even if you think that this verse says that only the moon and its mansions are being used for the counting of years, if the moon and its mansions are being used, then the sun is also being used for the counting of years, and you have a lunisolar year. If the crescent is in a certain mansion at the start of the year, then the sun is in another specific mansion. And if you start the year whenever the sun is in a particular mansion, you have a solar year. And so what we see from these 2 verses, 17:12 and 10:5, is that both of them point toward the use of a lunisolar calendar, in which the sun and the moon are used to determine the start of the year.